What's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video. I hope you guys are having a fantastic day, evening, night, wherever you guys currently reside on this planet Earth. Today we're going to be talking about the pen tool, some tips, tricks, and essentially the features behind the pen tool, just so you have a better sense of how to use it. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright, so now we're in Photoshop. We're going to kind of go into the very simple idea first of how to get to the pen tool super efficiently. Well, what we can do is super complicated. I don't know how I memorized this. You have to hit P on your keyboard. I know, crazy. It's a lot of work, but it's super important to understand. It brings you straight to the pen tool when you're on a different tool. For example, the move tool, which by the way is V on your keyboard. If I'm moving something and now I want to go to my pen tool, I have to hit P on my keyboard and then it'll automatically bring me to the pen tool. Super complicated, I know. All right, so now that we're on the pen tool, let's bring up these 2 points. We have A and B. I want to go from A to B. Super simple. Well, let's click at point A, click at point B, and just like that, I created a path going from point A to point B. Now, what you need to kind of understand first, however, before you can start clicking around is, do I want to create a selection? Maybe do I want to mask something out, right? Or do I want to create a shape? If you know you want to create a shape, make sure that when you're doing everything that we're about to talk about, make sure you're on the shape button. There's a tab on the top left when you're on the pen tool. Normally it will default to path. If you want to create a shape, you know you wanted to have some fill to it, you can have the shape selected. If you forget to, no worries, we're going to talk about how to actually convert a path to a shape. So don't freak out, it'll be fine. But yeah, if you already know you want to do that ahead of time, by all means you can click on shape, and you'll notice that as you start clicking around, the color that will automatically default to a certain color, pretty much that you might have used last probably, you'll notice it'll start to kind of fill. So for the sake of this, we're just going to have it on path to kind of understand how the paths work, and then we're going to transition to making it into a shape. That's what I recommend for you as well. So we're going to make sure it's on path, and like I said, we created a path from point A to point B. But this has a little bit of a slope to it. I want it to be completely horizontal. Well, let's back up for a second. Let's click at point A, but this time let's hold down shift. And by holding down shift, it will automatically make a nice horizontal line going from point A to point B. This also works when you want to make something go perfectly vertical or even perfectly at 45 degrees. Going back, if I click at the very top, hold down shift, and click at the very bottom, it will automatically make a nice vertical line for me. And if I want to make a 45 degree angle, I'll click somewhere around point A, and I'll click somewhere around point B where I think it's kind of at like a 45 degree angle, give or take. It doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, because this is the point. It's going to make it perfect for you, right? I click there. Notice how I was pretty off here. This line is following this path here. So if I were to continue, kind of end off somewhere over here, I clicked somewhere in this general area. So I was completely off. Photoshop saved me and it made it perfectly 45 degree angle. So that's how you make things nicely horizontal, nicely vertical, or even nicely at a 45 degree angle. Now, how do I make something into a curve, right? How do I have this path where they're following these nice kind of paths, this nice flow to it essentially, or even make it into a circle, right? Which you can translate it over as well. But I'm gonna keep these 2 points on here just so you kind of have a good reference point to kind of work with. We're gonna make a nice complicated but not really wave, right? Going from point A to point B. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna click at point A, we're gonna click somewhere at the top of the wave, but this time when we click, we're also going to drag as well. And by dragging, that's going to create 2 handles. Essentially, they look like handlebars to the middle anchor point. If we want to make those handlebars nice and straight, we hold down the shift and you'll notice they stay nice and straight. And by going vertical with it, you'll notice it stays nice and straight, just like we talked about before, also goes 45 degrees. And what these handlebars do, these handles, essentially what they create and what they do is they manipulate the curves from the previous or the next anchor point. And what I mean by that is we just created this second anchor point. This is the first anchor point. This handle to this anchor point is what's manipulating this curve. This handlebar is what's going to manipulate the next curve that we will create afterwards. So if we were to create another anchor point, we click and we drag this handlebar right here. This handlebar to the left of that third anchor point that we made is what's manipulating basically this bottom part to this curve. And this handlebar is adjusting the top part of this curve. So if we were to kind of mess around with them, that's how you would kind of manipulate the curvature to it. So let's just continue, right? We just made our third point. I want somewhere up here. We're gonna click, drag, holding down shift so it's nice and straight with those two handles. And then at the very end at point B, clicking and dragging. And just like that, we've created a wave going from left to right, point A to point B, going up, down, up, and back down, nice and smooth all the way through. Now, let's say we did something and we're not satisfied with it. I'm not liking how one of the waves or one of the peaks of this wave, let's say, is looking. I want to go back. I want to adjust it. Well, all you have to do is hold down the command button. Now, your command button, by holding it down when you have the pen tool out, is going to allow you to manipulate this curve and move things around and adjust things the way you want it. So by holding down command and clicking on that anchor point, we now, once again, we see those two handlebars. By holding down command and clicking on that anchor point, we can now move the anchor point as a whole and drag it super high up to create this really steep wave in the beginning, and then it kind of fades out towards the end. Or maybe I want to do the opposite. By holding down command and dragging it down, I can have it super low in the beginning and then it kind of peaks up a little bit more towards the end, right? So that's how you manipulate the anchor point itself. But let's say we want to manipulate the curvature to it. We like where the anchor point is, but I want there to be, let's say, more of a dramatic curve going from the second point that we created, which is this one, to the third point. Well, by holding down command and clicking on that handlebar to the right, or handle rather, and we drag that out, you'll notice that the curve going from the second point to the third point is starting to kind of extend out. And the midpoint of that is in order to compensate for what's happening, it has to steep down super quick to get to that other point. If we want to kind of continue this, let's holding down command and clicking on the handle to the left of the third point, we can make it even more steeper by dragging it more towards the other side. And this is how we can make a super steep slope if we want to the curves or to the wave. I'm not a big fan of this, so we're gonna hit Command Z a few times and kind of come back to our original wave that we created. But that's just the idea if you want to go in and adjust some things. Now, let's say you only want to adjust one side of the curve and not the other, because notice how when I hold down that command button, and then as we're still holding down the command button and we click on one of the handles, it adjusts the other side of the wave, the other side of the curve. If we only want to adjust one side of it, well, all we have to do, instead of holding down command when we're going to move the handle, we actually hold down the option button. When you hold down the option button, you'll notice that there's this little arrow that pops up on one of the handles, right on that point. When you see that arrow, that means you're in the right spot. What this essentially is going to do is it's going to break the handles into two pieces. Instead of it kind of working together, it's now going to work independently of one another and not the other. So by holding down option, you'll see the arrow pop up, and you click and you drag it around, you'll notice that it's only being affected on one side and not the other. Now, let's say that you did this, but you want to go back, right? In order for you to go back to the original point where the anchor point was being manipulated by the handles together, right, dependently, not independently, the way you do that is while still holding down option, you click and you drag on that anchor point. It will essentially reset the anchor point back to its original state, right? You have to make sure you click and drag in order to get those handlebars to extend out, because if you don't, by holding down option and just clicking on the anchor point, you will get rid of both anchor points. Not both anchor points, both handles. Both handles will be essentially deleted. Now the curves are only being affected by the previous anchor point and the next anchor point. Notice how these handles up here are what are creating this curvature to this anchor point down at the bottom. If we want to bring those handles back and get that nice flow once again, holding that option, seeing that arrow pop up on that anchor point, clicking and dragging, holding down shift so that we keep both handles nice and horizontal to one another, we can create that nice curvature to the wave once again. Now, let's say we want to create a corner, right? We don't want there to be this curve at the corner, because you'll understand what I mean by, let's say I'm at point B and I want to come back to point A, almost repeating what I did, right? Kind of looping back up, down, back to point A. If I were to continue off from that point and I click and drag, you'll notice that at this area, it's all curved. I want there to be a sharp pointy edge, but here I'm getting a curve. So what you want to do if you want to counteract this is create that point, create that awkward curve first, and once you've created that, holding down that option key like we talked about before, clicking on that handle, you'll then drag it over to the same side as the other one. You'll notice this is kind of awkward right here, and that's just because I need to move this anchor point over a little bit. So as a recap, holding down Command on our keyboard and clicking on the anchor point itself, it'll allow us to move the anchor point as a whole. So I'll drag this up roughly around here, let's say, or maybe a little bit further, right about there, and clicking on this point just so we can kind of see what we're working with, holding down the option key once again to kind of adjust this a little bit more. You'll notice that now at point B we have a nice curve to the wave, and it's nice and pointy at that edge. Now, let's say you notice that when you were going to continue your work, because obviously we're not done here, we want to come back and connect at point A, but notice how there's a star next to your pen tool. That star is basically telling you that if you click right now and you continue onwards, you are creating a new path, right? You are not creating, or you're not continuing off of your previous work. What you have to do so that you continue off of your previous work is if you click on that last point that you were working on, you'll notice that there's this new symbol that's a square with two little lines on each side of them. If you click on that point, it will then allow you to continue working off of that. So that's just in case you run into that issue where you end up working on a different path and the path is not even connected to the last one. So let's finish this off a little bit. Let's just adjust this, holding Command, moving it, and then we can continue holding Command, drag this out, and this is where you kind of have to come in and work with it a little bit, right? We'll go here, drag this out, come back up, drag, and then once we are done, you'll know that you are completing the circuit when you click on the very last point, or when you hover over the very first anchor point you ever created. You'll see a little circle, and that circle basically means that you're about to complete the circuit or complete the path circuit that you made. So if I click and drag just to make sure that I'm happy with it, and yeah, that looks about good to me. Now, if you originally, when you created this path, I'm going to do one real quick for you, real quick. If the very first point you created at point A, if you clicked and dragged, right, and then you start working off of that path, you'll notice that that very first point has its own handle to it. So let's say we continue onwards, right? We're making this wave. We come all the way to point B, and now I want to come back. We're kind of recapping here a little bit, where we then hold down the option key, go over to that handlebar, drag it over back onto the other side, and then we can continue on. If we come all the way back, we're essentially making a worm right now. If I were to click on that point, notice how it completely notice how it completely crossed over our original path, and then it swooped back over to that point. The reason why I did that is because when we created that very first point, we clicked and we dragged, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that happens, we can make that adjustment and make that a nice sharp point, just like we did on point B and how we talked about 2 or 3 times at this point, right? I hope you remember, where when you click on that point, holding down Command, so we can edit the handles. Notice how we still have those 2 handlebars, and notice how this handlebar to the left is what's creating that curvature. If we don't want that, all we have to do is hold down that option key, grab that anchor point, and drag it over to that same side, and just like that, we create a nice sharp edge at point A, and we essentially remade what we made above. Now this entire time we've been creating these paths, but notice how on the layers, right, there is no shape, there is no paths that popped up. All we have is the letter A, the letter B, and our background that is white. Where are the paths? Well, if you're a little bit confused on that, if you look above, right, you have your layers, you have your channels, you have then your paths. If you click there, you'll see the very first path that you created. It'll say work path more than likely. And what we have here is, because this was one layer, both of these two paths that we created are under the same layer. So we have both of them. If we want to have them as separate layers, if we come down to the very bottom and click that square with the plus sign, we can create a new path layer, and then we can kind of continue to work, right? Notice how we just made this shape, for example, and we click on the original one. Now we have both of these, but the other one isn't being selected. And that's how you kind of split those shapes up. So make sure, if you want to have them separate, make sure to make a new layer before you continue onwards, because if you don't, all of the shapes that you are going to make, all the paths and circuits that you make, are all going to be under the same layer. And if you want them to be individual, you have to make sure you make them into new layers. Now let's say that you created a nice looking path, it's in this nice shape. I'm a big fan of this bottom one that we created. If we want to actually fill this in, right, we want to fill in this shape, all we have to do is, if we come over to the layer tab and then we come all the way down to the bottom to where we see this circle, essentially it looks like a pizza, like a half-eaten pizza. If we click on that and we drag up, click and drag up to the solid color, and we let go on there, notice how it filled it in, but it filled in both of them. And this is what I was talking about before, where if you only wanted one of them to be this color, you would need to have them as separate layers. Because they're on the same layer, both of them are going to get filled in. You can kind of work around this by creating a mask, which I talked about in a previous video, linked above if you want to check that out. But basically, this is now going to give us the option to fill it in, create a new shape. And this is what I was talking about before, where on that upper left tab, when we have that pen tool selected, notice at the very top it has path, shape, right, in that drop down menu. If we had it under shape, we can make a shape right away. We click around, you'll notice I'll click on shape, I click around, and I automatically make a shape. And when I made that shape, notice how it automatically put it in the layer. That's because it's not a path, it's a shape. So when you're working with paths, it will go into the path tab. When it's automatically a shape, it will make it into a shape. It will automatically fill it with the previous color you used. And if you want to adjust that, all the adjustments are at the very top, and it will add it into your layers. But that's how you go from creating a path and making it into a shape layer. Because notice here, we have our shape. We can click, we can drag, we're using the move tool, we can move it around, and we can make our adjustments from here. If you already know you want to create a shape, just make sure that shape is selected on that drop down menu, and you're going to instantly create a shape right away and don't have to kind of go through that extra step, basically. Alright, I hope you guys learned something at the end of this. I hope I didn't say essentially too many times. If you guys are a little bit confused about that, watch my previous video, you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to like and comment down below. If you're still confused on something, just let me know down in the comments. I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoyed. It's been myself, Steven, aka Scream. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace out. Much love. Latest.